Have you ever witnessed a birth that was clearly a result of a cheating spouse? It wasn't at the birth, but I used to work for a urologist who did vasectomies. He did a vasectomy on a guy, then did the requisite 3-month and 6-month fertility follow-up test to make sure it worked. The 6-month test showed no sperm, so the guy was all set to not father children. Fast forward 2 years, and he calls my surgeon fuming, ranting and raving about how they messed up the vasectomy, and now his wife is pregnant. So Doc orders another fertility analysis. Of course, it comes back totally negative. A very awkward conversation ensued in the exam room that I'd have paid anything to eavesdrop on. The best part is, the couple left the office teed off, with the wife sticking to her story that she would never cheat on her husband, and the husband in complete denial that she'd ever lie about that. Last I heard, they were gearing up to sue or something, but I don't work there anymore, so I don't know what happened. Not 100% sure how those tests go, but I just laughed out loud at the thought of some dude angrily tugging away like, "Not my kid, I'll show you." These stories remind me of something I experienced firsthand the day after my son was born. Nurse: "So, your baby's blood type is A negative. Wife: "Like me." Nurse: "And daddy?" Me: "No, I'm an A+. Nurse: "You must be mistaken, that combination isn't possible. I'll leave you guys to it." Me pulls out phone and frantically Googles baby blood type combinations. Disclosure: the nurse was wrong. Props for checking first before attacking your wife. Yep, that's why he checked first, but if he attacked her straight away like some guys in these stories, they'd have one hell of a marriage to repair afterwards. A patient asked if both possible fathers could be in her C-section so that neither would miss the birth of his child. They'd figure out the details later. After a lot of careful consideration, because it did seem like a semi-reasonable plan, the answer was no, because it was too easy to imagine many scenarios in which a fight might break out in the OR and instruments go flying. Also, there's a pretty strict rule about only one person allowed with the patient in the OR. In the end, she brought her mum. You know what? Out of all the outcomes here, I think they definitely settled on the most sensible one. Possibly the only sensible decision leading up to that baby. Who knows? We don't know the full story. A friend of mine went through it. He went down a dark path of substances and we'd lost touch after a big fight about how he was messed up all the time and he was wasting his life. He contacted me out of the blue to say that I was right. He needed to step up and be responsible, and that he'd quit everything cold turkey because he was going to be a dad. Apparently, he was going to help his girl get sober and they were going to have this kid and get married. He really got his crap together over the course of the pregnancy. He was clean, got a job, and got a nice place to live. She was not so dedicated. She continued to use all kinds of substances throughout the pregnancy. She ended up going into labor early at 26 weeks. She gave birth to a premature, addicted baby boy. He went directly into the NICU. She stayed at the hospital and visited the NICU until she was released. She then disappeared. She never visited the baby, never called to check on it, didn't go home, just fell off the face of the planet. He, however, spent every spare second at the NICU with that baby. However, as the weeks passed, it became pretty obvious that the baby wasn't his, as skin tone evened out and hair came in. Chick was blonde with blue eyes. My friend is super pale blonde with blue eyes as well. The baby was clearly half Hispanic. He wanted to adopt the baby, but they wouldn't let him. The state took it and it went into foster care. It totally messed him up for a long time. He relapsed for a while and got into a bad car accident. He spent some time in the hospital and then got everything back together. He's married now to a really nice girl and rapidly had 4 kids that are his, with another currently on the way. Isn't that just the worst thing? What was so different about him than any other potential adoptive parents? At least he'd been there the whole time. At least he cared. Did they really think putting the baby into a convoluted foster system was the best thing for him? Glad the dude's doing well, though. Probably his history with addiction, which may have come with some legal troubles, which worsens the situation in the eyes of CPS. When I was born, my father was 100% certain that I was not his because his blood type and my mum's blood type couldn't have produced me. He punched a hole in the wall in the hospital and yelled at my mum refusing to sign the birth certificate because I have A positive blood. My mum has 0 negative and he was positive that he had AB negative because that's what his brand new dog tag said. He was in the army at the time. Turns out they'd misprinted his dog tags. All his old tags said A positive. In conclusion, a typo on my dad's army-issued dog tags almost caused my parents to divorce. To be fair, a misprint like that could kill him in other ways. But it's absolutely possible for an O-negative and an AB-negative parent to have an A-negative baby. Like the only 2 blood types that couple could produce are A-negative and B-negative. Do you mean you've got an A-positive blood type? I'm not a doctor, but when my godson was born, the nurse told us about this guy who had gotten 2 girls pregnant at the same time. They both wound up in the hospital just down the hall from each other, giving birth hours apart. What a lucky guy. When my mother was giving birth to my little sister, my paternal aunt was also giving birth to my cousin in the same hospital. My dad was back and forth between the 2 rooms often enough to get some looks from the hospital staff. Funny story that reminds me of this. My husband, then boyfriend, was in the process of getting divorced when I found out I was pregnant. His soon-to-be ex-wife found out a month later she was also pregnant from a guy she'd had a one-night stand with, not my husband. Prior to this, she was refusing to sign divorce papers because she hoped to reconcile even if he did have a pregnant girlfriend. Obviously, it wouldn't work out since she got knocked up by another guy, so she finally signed them. The similar part is that our due dates were 11 days apart. We had the same obstetrician and were set to deliver at the same hospital. My company switched insurances a week before I was due, and I got to pick a different hospital. Wouldn't you know it, we went into labor hours apart and delivered on the same day. Our obstetrician had to deliver my son first and then run across town to deliver her son. The OB did a double take when he saw my ex's family show up to visit her late after visiting us. They were the, "He may have divorced her, but we didn't" mind. His sister even stayed when she delivered to be her support buddy, even though she was officially with the one-night stand guy and his family was there. Our OB told us that may have been the most Jerry Springer thing she'd seen in a while. My friend was the delivery nurse for the hospital that all high-risk pregnancies go to. They're extremely busy and she's brought a lot of people into the world. She once delivered a baby in the parking lot by herself. This has come up on a weekly basis, but she shared the best story with us. A Caucasian couple come in and the mother is in labor. When the dude is filling out paperwork, the mother takes the doctor aside. She tells him there is a chance that the baby may be a different race than the father and to let her know as soon as the baby is born. The baby is born. The doctor turns to the mother and announces loudly, "Congratulations on your white baby boy." Well, this is fun. My wife's cousin, third, came out black. She's married to the pastiest Irish guy you can find. Their marriage didn't end, but this has created an interesting story. Grandma tells everyone that he is really just Native American. Her husband was half Native. He's now 15 and still no one in the family will admit that he's black. One of my colleagues in AmITheA once placed an epidural in a heavily tattooed lady. Apparently she had Steve's lunchbox tattooed above her hoo-ha. She gave birth. The OB-GYN turned to the father in the room and said, "Congratulations, Steve." The guy stated, "My name isn't Steve." No meltdowns or anything, just an awkward moment. That is brilliant. Also, what a tattoo to commit to. Clearly some misplaced faith in the longevity of a former partner's relationship. That'll be a painful one to remove. My mum is a labor and delivery nurse. One time she had a patient whose parents were present during her stay at the hospital. The staff there have a whiteboard with some general information about the patients like blood type, time spent in the wing, and like how far along. This information is nameless for IDOWorkHereLady reasons and instead has a patient's number. So this patient happens to be the only one in the wing at the time. Her father was walking back from the cafeteria at one point and noticed the board. He stopped one of the nurses and asked if the blood type for the patient on the board was correct. He knew his daughter was the only patient there. It was B positive. The nurse confirmed it was correct. Turns out he knew his and his wife's blood type. He was O positive and his wife was A negative. The combination will never yield a B-positive baby. He brings his wife out and just points to the board, and this look of shock washes over her. In conclusion, father of patient in labor finds out his wife cuckolded him 25 years later by knowing his blood type Punnett squares. Did he draw the squares in the whiteboard? I would have totally done that. Funny story, I ran a lab in college, and we were teaching the kids about blood types. Kid insists that his parents were a certain type of blood and that his square had to be wrong. Came to find out he was adopted and had just found out through basic bio. Poor kid. I'm white and my wife is black. I'm a frog belly fluorescent white, think ginger light. My wife is earthy brown. No one would ever describe her as light-skinned. We have a daughter. She had a difficult labor and our daughter was delivered via C-section. She did not really get to see our daughter immediately after delivery. Later in our room she was dozing and they brought our daughter in. My relatives and my wife's relatives all commented on how my daughter looked so much like me and was not even close to the pigmentation of my wife. So I carried my daughter over to my wife and gently woke her and showed her our daughter, and said, "I don't think she's yours." We all had a good laugh. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend told me this story of hers. Woman and her husband were having their first child, and it was the friend's first ever delivery, OB-GYN. When she got the baby out, she looked at it, then looked at the parents and asked, "Okay, which of you has 6 fingers?" The mother broke down crying, yelling "I'm sorry" to the husband. Their neighbor apparently has 6 fingers. Did the father begin a lifelong quest to bring the 6-fingered man to justice? That is inconceivable. When my wife was born, she was very yellow, and the nurse quietly asked her mum about the paternity when the dad was out of the room. She was just born with a bad case of jaundice, and that nurse was an idiot. "My husband is half Mexican and I'm of Native American ancestry. We both look pretty white, though. When our son was born, he had plenty of the blackest hair and looked very yellow. They kept saying he was jaundiced. He was in the NICU for other reasons, but the tests didn't show elevated bilirubin. We kept asking when he could leave the NICU room with us as his condition improved. But 2 of the nurses kept insisting that he was also jaundiced and that they'd need to clear that first as my milk came in or through supplementation, using it like a threat to get me to supplement. Finally, my husband said, "He's not jaundiced, he's Mexican, damn it," and left the room. It was first time I laughed out loud in 5 days. The nurse was so flustered. My best friend's stepbrother was that guy who found out he wasn't the father because the baby was black. I'll try to make it short. Dude had gone to rehab twice and was doing really well. He came back home for a weekend and screwed his ex-girlfriend. Left and went back to his home state to continue his newfound life. Got the call that she was pregnant and dropped everything to come back and be a father. We were really worried he would relapse, but he was great. So 9 months of preparation goes by, he was going to be an awesome dad. All worries about relapsing were gone and he seemed ready to become the best dad he could ever be. Baby comes out, everyone's happy. Nurse takes him aside and after a few minutes says, "I want to ask you something. You do know that's not your kid, right?" He says, "What do you mean?" "Well, that baby is at least half black, but the pigments are probably going to really darken." So he goes over to his ex-girlfriend and asks if there's any way what the nurse told him is true. She starts sobbing and breaks down completely. Admits that she screwed someone else right around the time he came back. So he says, "All right, I'm glad you and the baby are healthy. Have a nice life." Walks into the waiting room where all the grandparents are waiting. Cheers, celebration. "Everything good?" "Yep, healthy baby, healthy mom. I'm not the father. I'm out of here." And walked right out the freaking door. The girl's parents even wanted him to pay and support. He moved back to where he got his life back together and is doing incredibly well. But man, I wish he had all that time back. At least he only wasted 9 months. If she had banged a white guy, they might not have noticed for 18 years. This is clearly an incredibly complex and nuanced problem. She was single and clearly shouldn't be judged for behaving as such, but maybe be upfront about seeing other people around the same time? Or with hindsight being 20/20, use protection. This story sucks for everyone involved. This one's about my mum. She had my brother when she was only about 16 and had a very hard birth with him. Back in that time, the husband wasn't allowed in the labor room and my grandma was at work. When my brother was born, he got stuck, so they had to use forceps and he was also jaundiced, so he looked like an Asian baby. My grandma turns up after work and is looking at all the babies in the room where they were kept and asks which one was her daughter's baby. The nurse points to my brother, and him, looking all Asian, my grandma storms up to my mum in the ward and said, "Which Asian guy did you sleep with?" Well, my mum thought she was joking, so she said, "I don't know, it was too dark to see." My grandma then proceeded to hit my mother until a nurse came in and explained. My brother is now 44 and as white can be. So I'm an NICU nurse that was floating to the nursery. A baby was born with a specific genetic abnormality, he had one missing limb, but was otherwise doing fine. The pediatrician was in the parents' room discussing with them the follow-up type stuff for the baby, appointments with a geneticist, an orthopedic surgeon, etc. At some point in the conversation, the mother asked what the baby's blood type was, to which the pediatrician responded with A positive. The father of the baby insisted that was impossible, as he and his wife, this was their 3rd baby, were both O negative. The pediatrician got totally flustered and came back to the nursery to verify the lab's results. The baby really was A positive. We even went so far as to redraw the baby's blood and retest it. Nope, A positive. There is absolutely no chance that the baby belonged to that man. The husband left the hospital soon after and didn't show up again until it was time to pick up the mum and the baby to bring them home. The mum spent the rest of the hospital stay lying alone in the dark, mostly hiding under the covers. My aunt is white and so was her husband. He passed a while ago. When they finally had a kid, my cousin was black. The family decided to ignore it, my uncle included. This was 1989, and to gain my young teen cooperation, I got an early Christmas gift, a Sega Genesis. Love my cousin. Not me, but this was an odd one that I heard because I casually knew one of the parents. The father, to be exact. He came in freaking out because his wife had a kid. Well, he was white. She was white. The kid was born with a very dark skin tone. He instantly dumps her and starts filing for divorce. She has no idea what the heck happened. She forces a DNA test on him before she'll do anything. 3 months later, well, turned out it was his kid. Her parents, his parents, everyone, think he is a butthead. His mother apparently had a black grandmother. So the genes came through extra strong somehow in their kids so many generations down the line. Safe to say they're going through a heck of a lot of therapy. She never cheated on him and he never believed her despite all her serious protests. Been about a year now and it's better but still not perfect. This happened to my brother's friend. His mother didn't tell him his father was black, so he grew up believing he was white. He got his girlfriend pregnant and the baby came out looking more black than he did. He stormed out, broke up with her, and kicked her out. After that, he confided in his mother about the situation, and that's when she broke the news to him. He felt like a butt and a half. She took him back, but he had to work for it. She was, of course, hurt by his accusations. But as far as I know, they're still together. My dad was a doctor, and he never told me about any meltdowns, but he told me they would deliver a lot of babies for unprepared parents. Teenagers, mums and dads with obvious substance or alcohol problems, legal problems, etc., generally not ready to raise a kid. For every one of those risky couples, it was usually teen parents who were 16 or 17, he would take a picture of the new mom and dad together holding the baby a couple of hours after the birth. Then a few weeks later, he would send the picture to them with a short note about how they'll make great parents and the baby is counting on them and just inspiring words in general. He has a whole photo album of the new mums and dads holding their baby in the delivery room when he was a doctor. And I have to say, it is some outstanding photography. Amazing stuff. And to tie these stories off with something a bit more heartwarming, let's have a nice long saga from small-town Illinois. I heard this from an old client who was an obstetrician. He was telling me stories about when he used to deliver babies at people's homes way back in the day. This was probably 15 years ago when he told me this story, and he was in his 80s. 83, if I recall correctly. Anyway, he was telling me about his son, and I asked if he delivered his own son. He said yes, and told me the most amazing, heartbreaking, and heartwarming story. In the late 1940s, the town ambulance/hearse/taxi pulls up at his little independent practice out in the boonies of Illinois. A volunteer firefighter comes in and says they have a lady in labor and they won't make it to the hospital, which is over an hour away. He tells them to bring her in. He delivers the baby and mum passes out. They clean her up, they clean up the baby. All seems normal. The mum wakes up and the doctor comes in to give her the baby. She starts screaming, "Get it away from me!" He's all confused and can't figure out what's going on. She keeps flailing around and screaming that she doesn't want to look at it. The doc takes the baby out back and comes back. She's calmer but still looks frantic and terrified. He talks to her and she just stares at him like he's got 9 heads. He finally asks, "Well, what do you want me to do with your son?" The mum stays silent for a long time and as he's getting up to leave, she quietly says, "Can you get rid of him?" The doc asks what she means. She says, "You know, just make him maybe go to sleep so he won't wake up." He said it took everything for him not to beat this woman to death right there and then. He went off on a tangent about how much he loved his work, working with all the new mothers in these little towns full of salt-of-the-earth people with great family values. On and on about how happy it made him bringing life into the world and this woman wanted him to murder her baby. He asked why and she ended up saying that her husband is in the military and it's not his baby. She couldn't let him find out. He kind of understood her rationale for not letting her husband know, but murder? So he suggested family, an orphanage, and other options back then, none of which seemed appealing in my mind. She said no to all of them because she couldn't risk this coming back to haunt me. He told her he'd see what he could do, and he let her rest. The next day, he tried talking to her again, and she was just more adamant about making it sleep. She said she wanted to hold her baby. He refused since he thought she had tried to kill him herself. She went nuts. In the end, he sent her home and told her that he had given the baby to his brother, who was a pastor and was unable to have children. He promised he'd never tell anyone, even the kid, who she was. Then he said he taught her a lesson. If she ever found herself pregnant again, she would come to him whether it was her husband's or not. If he ever found out she went elsewhere, he'd tell everyone the story. He said he did this because he was afraid she'd get knocked up and kill the next one, and he knew he'd find out if she went elsewhere because he was the only baby doctor for 5 towns around and knew other doctors at the hospitals. Of course, she could have delivered at home on her own, now that I think about it. She never had any other kids as far as the doc knew, and he said he did check up on her once or twice with his colleagues. Supposedly she died from a substance overdose a few years later. The doctor and his wife raised that baby as their own son. His wife wasn't able to have kids. The pastor brother was just BS, and it was to make her think he'd already given the baby away. He eventually told his son a very watered-down version of the story when the kid was older. The kid ended up becoming a plastic surgeon and has like 9 kids of his own. He's doing very well, he's very happy, and he probably would have never had a shot had that small-town fireman tried to press on to the hospital and wound up delivering the kid in the middle of nowhere. He was convinced she would have delivered and then smothered the baby by the time they got to the hospital. In conclusion, Lady gets pregnant by another man. Her husband has no idea because he's in the military. She ends up at a small-town doctor and wants the doc to kill the baby so her husband doesn't find out. Doc raises the baby with his barren wife, and the baby grows up to be a brilliant surgeon who gives the doc tons of grandkids and a huge family he never would have had otherwise. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.